Anyone can speak.
So I want to reference Abraham. I saw this recently and I thought it was a very interesting perspective. In Genesis 11, we're introduced to Abraham, and then in Genesis 12, Verse 2, Abraham is given this very vague promise, and he responds with a work. He responds by actually getting up and relocating like God told him. And then in Genesis 12:7, God appears to him and gives him a little bit more detail. He responds with another work. He creates an altar. And then in Genesis 13, God appears to him a third time, and he responds with another work. He creates an altar. But it's not until Genesis 15, verse 6, that he is said to be justified by his faith, because it says, and then Abraham believed God, and it was accredited to him as righteousness. Now, that's the first time Abraham ever speaks. But in Genesis 15:6, he actually responds, and he's wrestling with God. God appears to him in a vision. He says, greetings, Abraham. I'm your exceedingly great reward. And then Abraham responds and says, what will you give me, seeing as I go childless? And God says, I'm going to give you an heir. And then at that point, it says, and then Abraham believed God, and it was accredited to him as righteousness. So that is like the foundation for our faith as believers. And we see that it wasn't until he kind of wrestled with God and it really was internalized, and God obviously saw his heart, that was true and sincere belief, that he was considered righteous. It wasn't the works that were done prior to that.
I actually never heard of it from that perspective before, and I think that's beautiful. And I think that what we have to remember in many respects with the Old Testament is that the Old Testament always points to the New and the New Covenant that Jesus Christ established. So within Catholicism, we do believe that you are saved through grace by way of faith, but your response to that grace and faith is quote unquote work. But it's more complicated than that, right? So grace, as we know, is freely given. It's a free gift. There's no merit to grace. It's a free gift, and God wants to give it to us in abundance. But God's grace is not like, he doesn't force it on you. So you have to accept that grace, right? Because that's where our free will comes in. And once you accept that grace, that's what faith is. Break down the definition of faith. Faith is belief in that God exists, and a belief that you will lay your life down, your intellect and your will, in order to follow him. So everything that you do comes from that place of love and charity.